Today we're going to discuss the situation in Greece. I'm here now with Stathis Gouvelakis. If the Syriza party wins the elections, it will be the first big break in Europe with austerity politics and with neoliberalism. So a great deal is riding on this election. And it's taken a long time to reach this stage. Very briefly, the history of Greece since the Second World War has been very tormented. A huge civil war that took place both during the German occupation and carried on afterwards, with the Western powers, largely Churchill in Britain, backing the right and the extreme right in Greece, and the Russians, the Soviet Union as it was then, effectively refusing to back the Greek resistance on the left because a deal had been struck at Yalta. The civil war was won by the right and the extreme right in Greece, and it has dominated Greek politics for longer than people imagine. That the politics of that period dominated Greece during the Cold War, when it appeared in the 60s that a moderate center party of the left center, might win the elections. The United States and NATO organized a coup d'etat, and the military ruled Greece for several years after that. A brutal period in Greek history, tortures, expulsions, people leaving the country and going into exile. And when this finally ended, there was a great deal of hope that the party would now come to power and transform Greece. Well, they did come to power, but they didn't transform Greece. And so the crisis continued. The question arose after the 2008 Wall Street crash, what was going to happen to countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy, who were being crushed. The attempt by the European Union and the Troika to impose austerity has now failed. This is why already in 2012, Syriza had become the largest party on the left and was threatening to challenge and take over from the extreme center parties, the Conservatives and the so-called left party PASOK. They got close to winning the 2012 elections, but a campaign of intimidation, fear was so fierce that especially in the countryside and amongst older people, they were frightened off. Since 2012, the mood has changed because the Conservative government in power, backed by its allies in parliament, has failed miserably. Greece is in a mess. Unemployment is high, unemployed people can't be paid benefits, there are food shortages because people cannot afford to buy the food that is available in many of the shops. Barter has existed in this country, so change is now expected. And because the right and its allies have failed, the tune of the Western media too has changed. January the 19th, New York Times, and the headline is, "An appeal to populism could pay off in Greece." Stathis, let's start with this New York Times headline. I mean, what is the meaning of the word populism? Why do they use it?
Populism is just the name of the big other of mainstream politics. Everything that is considered as alien to mainstream politics is characterized as populism. So it's a category that amalgamates the far right, xenophobic, nationalist parties, and also parties that reject the neoliberal dogma. And this is the case of Syriza. The difference is that Syriza is the party of the left, but it is a party of the left that has fought against neoliberalism. And the crucial stake of the party before even the crisis in the 2000 years, and that was at stake in its internal debate and confrontation, was the rejection of the strategy of an alliance of a center-left type, because that has been the great trap in which many forces and parties of the alternative left have fallen into in the recent decades, more specifically in France with the Communist Party, but also in Italy, where the very promising Rifondazione Comunista experiment miserably failed when they entered the Prodi government. So Syriza had sorted that out positively before even the crisis, and that is, I think, the starting point for its capacity to become a credible alternative in the situation created by that very violent crisis and shock austerity policies that have been imposed.
Let's assume that Syriza wins. They win the election, and then what?
Syriza is at the gates of power. I mean, most opinion polls, but also the atmosphere in Greece, predict a victory of Syriza. The only thing that we do not know yet is how large this victory will be. And this is a crucial parameter, of course, of the situation, the issue of the parliamentary majority, more specifically. But Syriza comes to power with a very clear mandate, which is, in a way, the outcome of the situation itself. And this mandate can be summed up in three basic points. First of all, liberate the country from the burden of that unsustainable and completely absurd debt. Second, make a break with austerity politics, with all the mechanisms of the memoranda. And third, restore democracy, because the memoranda and the specific way those neoliberal policies have been imposed to Greece meant that democracy itself has been destroyed. Any notion of popular and national sovereignty is simply non-existent. The parliamentary institutions have become just a facade behind which, the governments have been just the executors, actually, of what had been decided with the Troika. All the functioning of the state apparatus is constantly monitored by the Troika. And the evolution of the situation meant that a very authoritarian state apparatus came and produced by the situation. So we need to break with that authoritarianism, which has penetrated deeply into the state, but also into Greek society itself. So this is the mandate of Syriza. That is its mission.
The implementation is not going to be as easy as some people imagine, because the pressures that will come from the European Union, the Troika, principally the German government, the German banking elite, are going to make it difficult to negotiate a settlement that favors the Greek people. It may happen, we can't exclude it. The question is, what if the negotiations with the institutions of the European Union fail? What is Syriza going to do? It is pledged to demolish the debt, or to negotiate their way out of it like the Argentinians did, probably. But what if the conditions are still unfavorable?
Well, the issue of Syriza is that we don't want to move unilaterally on the issue of the debt, except if we are forced to move unilaterally. And I think that's the only sensible solution. We have to be clear about one thing. The so-called bailouts to Greece was absolutely not money that went to the Greek economy or to the Greek state, and even more so to the Greek society. It exclusively went to repay the debt, right? So if they say, no, we reject your proposals, we have a weapon. And the weapon is that this will immediately lead to default, actually. And default will provoke a big mess and a big turmoil within the European Union, within the European Central Bank, because everyone knows that the Greek debt as such is a negligible part of the overall European debt.
Because were the European Union to play hardliners and say, okay, we can't do this, not because the debt is that large in terms of what we have, but in terms of the domino effect. If we allow the Syriza people to do it, the Spanish will ask for it next, the Irish, and who knows, even the Portuguese might begin to demand something different, so stop it. If they were stupid enough to do that, which they are capable of, then the openings in Europe could be huge, because if a Syriza government then defaulted, that would create complete panic, and it would bring people out onto the streets, in my opinion. You see, one of the things you said, which I think is extremely important to stress, and it's linked to the South American experience, that in order to combat, partially successfully, the propaganda of the Western media networks who were saying this is a dictator, this is Chavez's Venezuela, it's a dictatorship, when they had more elections than virtually any other government in South and North America combined. The only way support could be seen, since the West refused to accept the election results, saying this was a fluke, this was a freak, was to get people out onto the streets. I mean, I remember after they tried to topple Chavez, being in Caracas, and there were 1.5 million people on the streets to mark the anniversary of the coup. And when you see the people on the streets, you realize the value and importance of mass mobilizations. So I've been saying to Greek friends and comrades that a key aspect is going to be, whatever you do, even when there are negotiations taking place, that the level of mass mobilizations should be high. I think trade union, mass, popular, democratic mobilizations are critically important in at least the first 6 months to a year of a Syriza government.
The way Syriza strategically deals with this challenge is the following one. First of all, we are absolutely aware of the fact that we owe our rise and now to governmental power to the importance and strength of the mass movements Greek society experienced, especially the 2 first years of the crisis between 2010 and 2012. We had approximately 40 days of general strike, huge mass demonstrations, the squares and places and streets of the country being occupied by hundreds of thousands of people for weeks, a bit like the Indignados movement in Spain. And it's no coincidence if it is in Greece and Spain that we have this new political landscape with those forces of the radical left that have risen in a spectacular way these last years. So popular mobilization has already been the key that led us to where we are now. On the issue of the break with austerity politics, we do not negotiate that. No. This is non-negotiable. So we have a core set of commitments which start from extremely basic things, the satisfaction of the immediate vital needs of the population that has been completely marginalized, of all those lives that have been broken by the austerity politics. So we want, electricity, health coverage for the entire population. We will give money for food stamps. But we also want to bring back the minimum wage to the level it was before the crisis. We need political success. We need concrete measures that will give confidence to the people, that will give a concrete possibility for them to mobilize again and actually to go even further than what appears as moderate but absolutely essential objectives.
This will, of course, necessitate, let's put it like this, stinging the bourgeoisie, the Greek bourgeoisie, which has had it without any regulation or controls at all. They have made money like nobody else. The ship owners' mafia pays no taxes at all and is very proud of the fact and boasts about it. Greece, they're in our pockets. Well, the politicians and the media are in the pockets of the oligarchs, as we know. So they will have to be taxed. And secondly, an important question is also, for how long can you leave the church to be untaxed? I know this is a very sensitive question in Greece, but they own large tracts of property. We don't have the image of sort of peasant monks or workers' monks. We have the church as an institution, which something has to be done about, in the sense that it should pay its share of the normal taxes, which helps the ordinary people. They shouldn't even be opposed to it. So that's one big issue on which previous governments have refused to do anything, taxing the rich and the very rich. And linked to that, of course, is the question of stopping privatizations and making sure that the utilities, which you were talking about, hospitals, schools, are in fact owned by the state. Because that you can't depend on privatization and privatized companies to deliver the goods, as we are finding out in Britain and in other parts of Europe.
Actually, they are selling the infrastructures. They are selling the airports, the ports of Greece, the electricity, the company, the water company. So, I mean, basic utilities. And this is completely scandalous. I mean, completely scandalous. Everyone knows that there is a lot of corruption behind this. The Qataris and a Greek tycoon have recently bought what is considered as probably the best operation of real estate in Europe. It is the old airport of Athens, nearby the sea. So a very large, actually, piece of land that was sold to these people for 70 euros per square meter. So it's hardly to imagine, you know, the kind of corruption that was behind this kind of deal, let's say. So it's perfectly possible, purely in legal terms, to cancel most of the privatization, not to say all that have been done recently, and actually to take back all these assets. Furthermore, I mean, you know, the Greek bourgeoisie, as you said, is a mixture of a subaltern bourgeoisie that considered its own country as, you know, a colony in a way, that never had a proper national project of developing, which is typical of a peripheral country, and extreme neoliberalism. Fiscal reform is absolutely needed. Environmental legislation is absolutely needed, and this is crucial to break with the previous model of development. Because you see, the memoranda, we say neoliberalism. Actually, there is a project behind this, and the most visible part is the privatization of the coast and the type of tourist industry they want to create.
The big difference between Spain and Greece on one level is that unlike Greece, where there is a far right and an openly fascist far right, these are not post-fascists or neo-fascists or liberal. These are fascists who demonstrate on the streets with fascist banners, who observe Hitler's birthday, who are embedded even in the special security organs of the state. That you don't have in Spain because of the past and because a lot of the extreme right integrated itself in traditional right-wing conservatism. So Podemos does not have to confront this threat, whereas a Syriza government, it could be confronted by right-wing street mobilizations encouraged by the previous regime. And how are they going to deal with that?
I mean, I think that the issue of the rise of not just a far right, but of a proper neo-Nazi organization like Golden Dawn, which has entered parliament with 7% of the vote in 2012, but nearly got 9% of the vote in the recent European elections. The situation of Greece is in a way comparable to that of Germany after the Versailles treaties, because the people really have the feeling that they have been brutally pauperized, humiliated socially, but also nationally due to the Troika rule, right? And it is on that ground that this, you know, primitive and completely delirious form of nationalism developed by Golden Dawn became suddenly relevant for some people. And it is also the violence of the situation created by, you know, this whole disaster at the economic and social level that made violent solutions appear as legitimate for parts of the population, because, you know, they have scapegoated immigrants. I mean, that's the standard story, of course. So what can we do? We have to find within the state apparatus, that's quite clear. We have to dismantle those pockets, actually, of really fascist, networks within the state apparatus, and especially within the police. The main problem is within the police, the judiciary, and there is the possibility of a strategy of tension in Greece. Italian style, let's say, you know, Italian style like the 1970s. But Golden Dawn, despite its appeal within Greek society, has not developed into a mass party, properly speaking. It's you know, a small organization of thugs, which is funded by, you know, the kind of mafia type of operations and isolated, fractions, let's say, but relatively marginal fractions of the Greek bourgeoisie, who just want to use these thugs in order to sort out issues at the level of their neighborhood, of their firm, of their company, and so on and so forth. They want to control the port of Piraeus, for instance, with the help of Golden Dawn, some ship owners, etc. So we have this situation that is one of the problems that indeed a Syriza government will have to face. But you have reminded that, Greek history is very tormented. We only had a few decades of, let's say, standard Western-type parliamentary life and democracy.
But Stathis, now that we see in the rest of the West that democracy itself is on the decline, number of books have come out, quite serious books, explaining how it is on the decline, and that this model of an extreme center with center left and center right basically doing the same things, which has created the openings for the left and the far right, doesn't give them all that much credibility today, because they have tried with neoliberalism, with austerity, with backing all the wars, and failed. So that is what gives me some hope that a Syriza government and a Podemos government in Spain, which carry out even modest reforms initially, but in effect reassert and establish Greek sovereignty and Spanish sovereignty, both against the bankers' elite that rules the European Union and, more importantly, against the United States. Against in the sense of saying, no, our interests clash with yours and we're not going to do what you want to do and what you've always expected us to do. Were they even to do that, I think it could really change the political atmosphere on this continent.
I totally agree with you, Tariq. I mean, the main issue is that the social democracy and the parties coming from the tradition of the workers' movement have been on the decline. They have been converted to neoliberalism. I mean, the Labour Party in Britain is a caricature, actually, of that degenerate, let's say, situation of what used to be even a social democratic left. The main, the crucial challenge of Syriza and Podemos is that these parties have strong ties with the popular classes of their own societies. They are determined to fight for basic democratic and social reforms. That's one dimension. But the second is, I think, the international dynamic of that. We shouldn't underestimate the hope that is invested in Syriza and in Podemos more broadly in Europe now. I was in Paris just a few days ago, and the gathering, the big mass gathering, the big rally to support Syriza actually acted as a catalyst for discussions and debates within the French left. With the Greens, for instance, who until recently were part of the government and have left government since the European elections, now they issued a statement to support Syriza. And they came to the rally and they said, for us, the reference now is Podemos and Syriza. That's an indication. I mean, we can have all kinds of, reservations about what they want to do, etc. But this is the capacity that Syriza can really trigger realignments within the broader progressive forces at the political, but also at the social level. The rally in Paris was a point of convergence of social movements, of campaigns, of trade unions. So I think that if the Syriza government starts a battle with the European institutions, if it makes a point at the European level, it can really provoke a dynamic and a recomposition of broader social and political forces at the European level and trigger what is absolutely essential, a new internationalism.
And I mean, we have not had a pole of attraction for the left in Europe for a very long time. Stathis, as a Greek activist yourself, how do you feel?
These are very strange moments, Tariq. First of all, I didn't, until recently, If one told me that, you are in a party who will be in a couple of years at the gates of power, I would say, this is completely stupid. This will never happen in my lifetime. I started becoming politically active at the very end of the 1970s, so it means that I have been through just a series of defeats until recently. And now I feel that very strange combination of emotion, excitement and anxiety.
Stathis, thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek.